What would you do if in the middle of a busy day you saw a desperate mother with a baby in her arms, huddled in the rain with nowhere to go? Would you ignore it and go on your way? Or would you make a decision that could change your life forever? Noah, a millionaire actor, was late for a meeting that could define his career, but the moment his eyes met that woman and her son, something inside him made him act. He didn't know her name or her story. He just handed over the keys to his own house. Hours later, when he returned, Noah found something he could never have imagined, and that simple choice would lead him down a path of revelations, mysteries, and feelings he never thought he'd be able to feel. Get ready for an exciting story, full of twists and turns, secrets, and an encounter that would change everything. Noah, do you realize you're late? They're waiting. Lucas spoke hurriedly, checking his cell phone every second. Noah sighed, leaning his head against the leather seat of the car. Outside, flashes were going off as fans tried to photograph him, even though the dark glass separated them. He raised his hand, unable to wave. I know. But tell me, Lucas, when was the last time a movie really made me feel something? Lucas rolled his eyes. Are we really going to philosophize now? You've got millions at stake. And what's the point if I don't even know why I do it anymore? The assistant didn't answer. Noah closed his eyes for a moment. His life seemed perfect in the eyes of the world. Billions at the box office, awards, interviews acclaiming his talent, but inside, all he felt was an immense emptiness. Concentrate on the meeting, Lucas insisted. This contract could define your career for years to come. Noah didn't reply. Instead, he watched the city move outside. In the rain, couples shared umbrellas. Children played in the wet reflections on the sidewalk. But then something made his chest tighten. A woman was huddled next to a lamppost, trying to cover a baby with a thin cloth. The little one was crying, its body shivering with cold. "Stop the car," Noah ordered. "What?" Daniel, the driver, turned around startled. "You heard him. Stop the car." "Noah, it's not a good idea. We're late," Lucas exclaimed. "I said stop the car." The vehicle braked sharply. Noah opened the door and stepped onto the wet asphalt. The cold wind whipped his face as he walked up to the woman. She cringed as she saw him approaching. "Do you have anywhere to go?" he asked, trying not to sound threatening. The woman stared at him, her dark eyes full of suspicion. "Does it matter?" "Yes," he answered without hesitation. The child wriggled in her arms, sobbing. Noah saw the little fingers red with cold. Without thinking twice, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his house keys. "Take this." The woman's eyes widened. "My house. My house. It's empty. Go there, warm up your son." I can't accept it." "You can. My driver will take you." She hesitated, but a gust of wet wind made the baby start crying again. With trembling hands, she reached for the keys. Noah returned to the car without waiting for an answer. As soon as he got in, he turned to Daniel. "Take her to my house. Go to the market first. Buy food, clothes for the baby, anything she needs." The driver nodded. "Yes, sir." Lucas stared at him in disbelief. "You just gave your house to a stranger." Noah looked at him, then back at the woman getting into the car with difficulty, holding her baby tightly against her chest. "She needs it more than I do." Lucas sighed. "You're impossible." "I know," Noah muttered, watching out of the window as the rain fell harder. The car started up again, but his mind was stuck on that scene. Something told him that this encounter would change his life forever. As the vehicle continued on its way, Noah realized that his heart was beating fast, something unusual for him. The lights of the city were reflected in the water on the asphalt, but everything seemed blurred, as if his mind was somewhere else. Lucas snorted next to him. "Now tell me, what do you intend to do if she disappears with your things?" Noah just gave a lopsided smile. "I think it's worth the risk." Lucas stared at him in disbelief. You're no good." Noah didn't answer. His mind remained fixed on the image of the woman and the baby. For the first time in a long time, something inside him seemed to have awakened. "Are you sure about this?" Sophie asked, gripping the keys tightly. The baby in her arms was whimpering, shivering with cold. Noah nodded, his gaze firm. "Yes, go with Daniel, he'll take you there." Sophie hesitated. Her eyes swept over the figure of the man in front of her. The elegant clothes, the carefully combed hair, the confident posture. He looked like someone from another world, one that wasn't part of her reality. I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything. Just go." Sophie swallowed, cradling the baby to her chest. Her instinct screamed at her not to trust, but the rain punishing her skin and the cold penetrating her bones told her she had no choice. Daniel opened the car door for her. With one last uncertain look at Noah, Sophie got into the vehicle. Noah watched as the car drove away, disappearing into the night fog. Lucas, still shocked, let out a nervous laugh. "That was insane," Noah replied, getting back into the car. "You don't even know who she is, and neither do you." Lucas shook his head in exasperation, but said nothing more. Silence filled the vehicle as they got back on the road. Noah tried to concentrate on the meeting that awaited him, but the image of the woman cowering in the rain with the baby wouldn't leave his mind. Sophie wrapped her arms around the baby, watching the mansion loom in front of them. "This house is huge," she murmured, more to herself. Daniel parked and turned to her with a friendly smile. "It really is. Mr. Noah spends very little time here. He's always traveling for work." Sophie didn't answer. Her heart was racing. It was crazy to be there. What if it was a trap? The baby cried softly. With a tired sigh, Sophie got out of the car. "Let's go in," Daniel said, opening the door for her. As she stepped into the entrance hall, Sophie stood still. The place was huge, elegant, and warm. A welcoming warmth enveloped her body, and for a second, she felt like crying. "The kitchen is over there," Daniel pointed. "I bought some things for you and the baby." Sophie nodded, unable to speak. "Well, I'll be right there. If you need anything, you can call the number I left in the kitchen." Sophie watched him leave, feeling the weight of loneliness fall on her shoulders. Noah's meeting was a fiasco. He barely paid attention to what the producers were saying. His mind was elsewhere. At the end of the night, back in his car, he picked up his cell phone and called Daniel. "How's she doing?" "Fine, from what I saw. I left everything organized before I left." "That's fine, thank you." Noah hung up and rubbed his eyes, exhausted. Lucas looked at him curiously. "Are you going home now?" Noah hesitated. "No. Are you going to any events?" "Are you going to an event?" "No." Lucas crossed his arms. "So, where are you going?" Noah let out a sigh and looked out of the window. "I just need to see something." The driver sped the car back to his house. Sophie was startled awake by the sound of the door opening. Her heart raced. She quickly got up from the sofa, holding the baby. Footsteps echoed through the hall. Then Noah appeared. His eyes roamed the room, stopping on her. "I knocked before," he said, noticing her startled expression. "You must be tired." Sophie didn't answer. She watched him, trying to understand. "Why did you come back?" Noah hesitated. "I didn't know the answer. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay." Sophie blinked, surprised. Noah looked away, uncomfortable. "Anyway, good night." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Noah." He looked back. Sophie hesitated for a moment, then said, "Thank you." Noah held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. "Good night, Sophie." And then he left. But something inside him told him that this story had only just begun. Noah woke up before the sun rose. He ran a hand over his face, trying to shake off the strange feeling that had accompanied him since the night before. Something seemed different about him, as if that simple decision to help a stranger had created an invisible detour in the path of his life. He got up, put on a shirt and went downstairs. The silence of the house enveloped him. He hesitated before opening the living room door and peering inside. Sophie was on the sofa, sleeping on her side with the baby in her arms. The blanket that Noah always left lying on the sofa now completely enveloped her. For a moment, he just stood there, watching. She seemed at peace. So did the baby. Noah realized he was holding his breath and took a step back. "It's too soon for that," he muttered to himself, closing the door. The day went strangely. Noah tried to concentrate on his work, but found himself distracted, fiddling with his cell phone, almost texting Daniel to ask about Sophie. It was just worry, he told himself. It wasn't as if he had any connection with her. Then the phone rang. "Mr. Noah?" The voice on the other end was familiar. "Daniel? What's wrong?" "Your father." He came to the house. Noah straightened up in his chair. "What do you mean, he went there?" "He said he wanted to spend a few days in the old house. He took a suitcase and dismissed me. I tried to convince him, but—" Noah felt his heart squeeze. "He went alone?" "Yes, sir." Noah was silent for a moment, then reached for his car key. "I'm heading there now." The drive was longer than it seemed. With every kilometer, the worry grew in his chest. His father shouldn't be alone, especially in a place where there was now a stranger. When he finally arrived, Noah saw a car stopped in front of the house. An ambulance. His heart raced. He jumped out of the car and ran in. "Dad!" The scene in front of him made his stomach turn. 2 paramedics were in the middle of the room, preparing a stretcher. On the floor, Benjamin lay, pale and motionless. Sophie was beside him, holding his hand. She looked up when Noah came in. "He's had a stroke," she said, her voice weak. Noah felt everything around him spin. "What?" "I called emergency as soon as I noticed." He started talking strangely, then he collapsed. Noah looked at his father, who was now opening his eyes with difficulty. "Son," Benjamin murmured. Noah knelt down beside him. "I'm here, Dad." The paramedics began to lift him onto the stretcher. "We need to take him now." Noah nodded and headed for the door, but then stopped and looked at Sophie. "You saved his life." Sophie blinked, surprised. "I just did what anyone would do." Noah looked at her for a few more seconds. "Thank you." She nodded slightly, but seemed hesitant. Then something unexpected happened. The paramedic looked at Sophie and then at Noah. "Your wife can accompany us to the hospital if you like." Silence filled the air. Sophie's eyes widened. Noah remained motionless. "What?" they said at the same time. The paramedic frowned. "Isn't she your wife?" Noah looked at Sophie. She looked as confused as he did. But to his surprise, she laughed. "No, I'm not." The paramedic just shrugged and continued his work. Noah laughed too, a short, nervous laugh. "Well, let's go to the hospital." He turned to Sophie. "Do you want to come?" She hesitated for a moment, but then looked at Benjamin, still on the stretcher. "Yes." Noah nodded, and the two of them left together, feeling that somehow a bond had begun to form between them. The hospital was silent at that time of night. The only sound that filled the corridor was the rhythmic beeping of the machines monitoring Benjamin's vital signs. Noah watched his father through the ICU window, his arms crossed, his face tense. Sophie was sitting on one of the benches in the waiting room, gently rocking the baby's baby carriage. Since they had arrived, she hadn't asked any questions. She just stood there, present, without invading his space. Noah let out a long sigh and sat down next to her. "The doctors say he'll recover, but he needs absolute rest." Sophie nodded, looking at the baby who was sleeping peacefully. "He looks like a strong man." Noah smiled. "He always was, even when he didn't need to be." The silence between them stretched on for a few moments, until Sophie asked hesitantly, "Did he go to the house on his own?" "Yes." Noah ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. He wanted a bit of independence, as if he didn't need to be looked after. "And you let him?" Noah laughed humorlessly. I didn't know. He snuck out. Sophie shook her head, laughing quietly. He seems stubborn. Extremely. She was thoughtful for a moment. I understand him. Noah turned to face her. Do you? Yes, Sophie shrugged. After spending so long depending on others, it's hard to accept that you need help. Noah remained silent, absorbing those words. Have you ever been through that? Sophie let out a short, mirthless laugh. Do you think anyone chooses to be on the street with a baby? Noah didn't answer. She continued, For a long time I lived under the control of others. First my father, then... She stopped, hesitating. Well, after someone I thought cared. He sensed the weight in those words, but didn't want to push her. And now... Sophie sighed. Now I don't know. Silence settled between them once again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It just existed, as if they both needed it to absorb everything that had happened. Noah looked at her for a moment before speaking. You can stay in the house for as long as you need. Sophie blinked in surprise. Noah, No arguments. You and the baby need a safe place. My father likes you, and I think I do too. She stared at him, trying to decipher what was behind those words. Isn't that charity? No, he said simply. It's just the right thing to do. Sophie opened her mouth to argue, but something in his gaze made her give up. Thank you, Sophie. Just don't get used to arguing with me. I always win. Sophie laughed, and for the first time since they'd met, Noah felt that maybe he was exactly where he should be. Weeks later, the routine in the house had changed. Benjamin, still recovering, spent much of his time talking to Sophie. He seemed to enjoy her company, and Noah noticed how it cheered him up. He himself began to get used to her being there. At first, he told himself that it was just a matter of helping her. But over time, he realized that he looked forward to the conversations in the evenings, to her laughter echoing through the house. Then, one evening, while they were on the balcony, he decided to ask, Sophie, what were your dreams before all this? She was surprised by the question. I wanted to study, to have a profession, to travel, but life had other plans. Noah took a sip of wine and looked at her. What's stopping you now? Sophie laughed. Well, for a start, I don't have any money. That's not a problem. She looked at him suspiciously. Noah, I'm not giving you anything. I'm offering you an opportunity, just like someone once did for me. Sophie was silent, processing this. Then she smiled. I accept. At that moment, Noah knew that his life would never be the same, and he didn't mind that one bit.